Hey everybody, and Tony here with my review of Verdi's Aida, which I saw at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden. The conductor was Nicola Luisotti. The production was done by Calixto Bieito. The sets were done by Rebeka Ringst. The costumes were done by Ingo Krugler. The lights were handled by Michael Bauer. The video designs were done by Adria Reichak. The chorus master was Dani Juris, and the dramaturgs were Bettina Auer and Christoph Lang. I've been anticipating watching this production of Aida by Calixto Bieito because even though I'm not a fan of this production, which you will find out later, Elina Garansha and especially Marina Rebeka were going to sing Amneris and Aida respectively, especially where Marina Rebeka as Aida was concerned. But before I talk about these two fine ladies as the rivaling princesses, my thoughts on Calixto Bieito's production and his attempts to turn Aida into his own critique, let alone satire of consumer culture, gun culture, the refugee crisis, and everything else that he managed to jumble in this particular production. He basically took Aida from ancient Egypt and transported the entire story into somewhat of a jumble between our modern times and even Verdi's time, given some of the costumes that the chorus members were wearing in the triumphal scene. We have women in bloomers and elegant dresses, and men in very formal clothing of the 1800s, probably to show that there is a bit of a so-called homage to Verdi and his time. But what was so noticeable about this production was, as to be expected from Calixto Bieito, the complete garishness of the sets, as in there was barely any color, and the only color that you get to see in this production of Aida is all white light, especially in the judgment scene, where we see the platforms go from being platforms to being these huge glaring spotlights for Amneris, and even go up to the ceiling. And while I can credit the people behind this production for the ergonomics as well as the overall physics of how to handle the production with care, I'm not really sold by it in its entirety, because when I think of Aida, I think grandeur, I think intricate sets, I think beautiful deserts, glorious pyramids, awesome temples, and just a whole lot of dusky, warm hues in the sets. Not something garish and overly jumbled up. And speaking of jumbled up, sometimes the video effects were pretty tacky and distracting at the worst, because we get to see some video stills of war images and huge ships coming in, as well as a slave catalog, and it's simply a confusing mess all the way through. Another noticeable attribute, if you can call it an attribute, is how Ramphis, the priests, and even Amneris' father, the king, go from being high priests to being a gun-toting cult, with everybody being armed with shotguns, Tommy guns, and we even have Amneris' father acting like such a hellion, trying to act all macho and tough and cool, as if though that he were the cool badass dad to Amneris, even when he has his little moment threatening Aida and threatening her people. And it shows that he's gone from being this stoic yet loving father figure to Amneris to being such a total macho jerk, toting guns everywhere he goes and trying to think that he's bigger and tougher than everybody else. We even get to see Thermuthis, or the high priestess in the flesh, also being one of the head honchos of the gun-toting cult. And she also has a little bit of a squeaky moment with Ramphis, which I dare not go into because she could pass as Ramphis's young daughter for all I care. Aside from these huge jumbled messes occurring in Calixto Bieto's production of Aida, there were also moments where the signifier becomes the signified. Radames's warrior code and warrior heroism is all projected in his handgun, which he uses and even loads when he is singing Celeste Aida to show that he can be both a gun-toting warrior and somewhat of a lovable gentleman to Aida, but we rarely get any of that lovability from this Radames. And Aida carrying the Ethiopian flag while she's singing O Patria Mia to show that, yes, she's got this flag as a remnant of her country, even to show that me as the viewer is being treated rather stupidly by having these signified turned signifiers in the flesh to think that I don't know any better. And the overall execution was just tacky, extremely tacky. Furthermore, there was a pseudo callback to Rigoletto in terms of how Gilda died, especially considering that she ends up being dragged out of the sack, and even Aida gets the Gilda's death treatment when Amneris drags an Ethiopian flag containing a body, and lo and behold, it's Aida. And this is also the same occasion in which Radames was also about to get executed in a way, and I say executed very loosely. Yes, sometimes the costumes can be quite elegant. I mean, I do love both Amneris's and Aida's costumes, especially Aida's signature green dress. However, I found the concept of Ramphis, his priests, and the high priestess being cult leaders just absolutely ridiculous. Although the bullet crowns were quite cool, but they were pretty distracting. So you can tell why I was not a fan of this production. It was very distracting, garishly lit. There was no sense of beauty, no sense of visual splendor. It was just pretty drab all the way through. And when you have an Aida production that is drab and ultimately very garish to look at, you might as well turn away and stick to real productions of Aida, most notably by Franco Zeffirelli and even Luca Ronconi. You can't go wrong with either production of Aida, especially when they are set in the original ancient Egypt, complete with a lot of scenic decor and a lot of beauty coming in here and there. And even the triumphal scene in this production was just basically kids being dragged out of the stage and being made to repair something, which was equally as distracting, and even the adults taunting the kids that they get all the sweets that they want and they just throw goodie bags at them. Therefore, the entire production by Calixto Bieto's Aida was just very messy all the way through, unappealing to look at. You might as well look elsewhere and turn your eyes into a traditional production of Aida if you want visual beauty, if you want scenic pomp, and if you want all of that elegance and grandeur. For those of you who are craving scenic elegance and grandeur, you may as well just turn away from Calixto Bieto's production of Aida and call it a day. With that ranting out of the way, I'd like to talk about the singers, but before I get to Marina Rebeka as Aida, a few words about Elina Garancia as Amneris. Now, Elina Garancia has been performing Amneris for about 1 to 2 years now, ever since she first fully performed it in Vienna. And when I saw her live as Amneris at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden, yes, you can't deny that she is a very glamorous figure. She knew how to play up the glamour of Amneris, that sort of femininity that she inhabited really well. And what more can you expect from someone who is quite the looker as Elina Garancia? She knew how to move around the stage with elegance, and gazelle-like elegance at that. She knew how to throw herself in as a pretty involving actress, although sometimes her expressions can be quite limited, which has kind of always been her downfall. But other than that, she knew how to play up glamour. She knew how to play up elegance. She knew how to play up being a princess. And she did so really elegantly all the way through. However, just because you know how to play up elegance as Amneris doesn't mean that your vocal resources in the role could match whatever beauty and strength you have in this role. Because Elina Garancia's vocal resources as Amneris were kind of on the shaky side. On the one hand, I will give her some credit for singing those chest tones, but when she sings those chest tones, they sound quite hollow, and her overall vocal production sounds pretty bland and quite vanilla to the ears. I will give her some credit for launching some really good top notes, but the overall package of her Amneris left a lot to be desired in terms of the tendency to sound hollow, the tendency to sound unsupported, let alone lacking in some sort of vocal core. But all those vocal flaws can somewhat be forgiven because she was able to imbue this role with elegance, even though her vocal resources were kind of lacking in core. It also says something when dramatic sopranos singing Amneris, such as Martha Fuchs, Gertrud Rönger, Annika Netzny, Helena Braun, Erna Schlüter, Margaret Harshaw, Rossi Belli, Astrid Varnay, Irma Essenyi, Ingrid Stiga, Sigrid Kehl, Mirella Paruto, Gena Dimitrova, and Isolde Eichlep had way more chest tones and way rounder and richer voices than Elina Garancia could ever accomplish, especially Gena Dimitrova, who has always been my favorite soprano singing Amneris, because yes, you could forgive the fact that she can sound throaty on occasions, but she had strong chest tones. She had those chest tones, she had those blazing top notes, and she had good coordination. So it really says something when a true dramatic soprano like Gena Dimitrova can sound chestier than the mezzo-soprano we have today in Elina Garancia. And if we're talking real mezzo-sopranos, I am still very spoiled of my choices of Gianna Pederzini, Ebe Stignani, Elena Nicolai, Chloe Elmo, Giulietta Signonato, Nell Rankin, Irene Dallas, Rita Gore, and Krista Ludwig, and lest I forget about the Falcon singers found in Shirley Verrett and Grace Bumbry, who had great vocal coordination and equally great chest tones. And if we're also talking about mezzos who could also sing soprano roles and kind of have the tendency to sound like sopranos themselves, look no further than Fiorenzo Cosotto and Vioritza Cortez, because they were definitely singers with really rock-solid chest tones. And speaking of chest tones, if you want equally epic chest tones, you can't go wrong with Oralia Dominguez and Elena Obraztsova, which unfortunately Elena Garancha kind of lacked, especially in her judgment scene. There were times that her cries of "Numi pietà" sounded hollow and almost frigid, as if something were clipping her and just clipping her wings when she was launching the pleads to have Radames's life spared. Therefore, Elena Garancha's performance as Amneris was an extremely acquired taste. The only saving factor that she had were her reliable top notes and her use of glamour and elegance to bring this princess to life. Other than that, I still feel like she really needs to work on her chest tones, because the problem that I've had with Garancha taking on these bigger dramatic mezzo roles is that she sounded hollow. She sounded as if though that something was holding her back. And there were occasions where she sounded swallowed and kind of throaty. However, if I were to take all those vocal flaws away, she was still elegant in the role. She managed to play up the elegance factor of Amneris, and she was still quite solid, although I would still hope for some beefiness, some more fire and passion, and red-hot Italian drama, a lot more voluptuousness, and way more size and excitement, because those are the factors I'm looking for in any dramatic soprano, let alone dramatic mezzo, singing Amneris. Elena Garancha did fall short of the vocal demands for Amneris. Nevertheless, she was still a glamorous figure on stage, and she played up the pathos pretty well, although her voice does need to continue tuning up a lot more. Now we get to Marina Rebeka as Aida. I was quite fearful for Marina Rebeka taking on Aida, because I always insist that Miss Rebeka is a dramatic coloratura soprano in the bel canto operas. I can never fault her efforts as the Donizetti queens, especially as Anna Bolena and Maria Stuarda. I've also loved her as Violetta Valeri from La Traviata, and she also had a lot of great coloratura techniques that she's used in the Italian and French repertoires. So seeing that she was going to take on Aida definitely took a lot of guts for Marina Rebeka. And as to be expected, she definitely wowed me with her technical precision and her really good vocal coordination. However, there were some areas where she could be a lot more chesty, a lot deeper, especially in those low chest tones, whether it be from Ritorna Vincitor or even in the triumphal scene. At least she gained in heft in the second half of the opera, and her singing of O terra addio was heavenly, not to mention how she managed the high C in O Patria Mia and how she built it up from going piano to increasing the volume and just letting it out with abandon. She did beautifully, and that was a fine dolce high C that Marina Rebeka pulled off with abandon, and I salute her for that. Yes, in the triumphal scene, I was also expecting her to sing the high E flat to wrap everything up. However, I was surprised that she didn't sing the high E flat, because every time I listen to her on YouTube or in a lot of her recordings, she has a very good high E flat. And I know that it's not written in the score and it's usually interpolated, but I would have expected Marina Rebeka, who had such a secure high E flat, to just let it out. She had a beautiful high E flat when she sang Coppia Iniqua, or even what she did as Lucia de Lammermoor. She had very great high notes, and she knows how to use her top notes with full abandon, even to the point where her overall vocal production just swallowed Elena Garancia's vocal production alive in her confrontation scene with Amneris. Perhaps the reason why she didn't end up hitting the high E flat in the triumphal scene was either the director's choice, or her choice, or the conductor's choice. Whatever it was, I do respect any of the decisions made, but it would have been epic to hear Marina Rebeka launch a high E flat after the triumphal scene. And yes, I have been very spoiled by my personal favorite singers of Aida who launched the high E flat. And those were Maria Callas during her Mexico years from 1950 to 1951, Marisa Galvani, Adelida Negri, Aprile Milo, and Dimitra Teodosiu, and even who we had today with Sayoa Hernandez launching that high E flat in Verona. And even though Marina Rebeka's voice isn't really a super huge spinto / soprano assoluta, or even that of a high dramatic soprano, she was still able to do well as Aida, and she was able to make the best out of Aida's music with abandon. It may not be a super dramatic instrument, but for someone who was known for florid singing and great top notes like Marina Rebeka, especially in the dramatic coloratura soprano repertoire, I could still say that this was a very great impression that she made as Aida. And if she were to take on this role once again, should she be daring to do so, I would even encourage her to take on the high E flat in the triumphal scene. That would have been very fun. Turning my attention from the two rivaling princesses is Termuthis, the high priestess sung by the ever gorgeous and ever beautiful lyric soprano Victoria Randem, whose pliable, agile, and sweet-toned voice made the high priestess an absolutely ethereal figure to listen to. She is just as good as my personal favorite singers of the role, including Eugenia Ratti and Joyce Mathis, and even Mieta Sigella, unless I forget about Teresa Stich Randall. She was absolutely beautiful, and how she navigated those florid passages, and her little dance in her scene was really sinuous and inviting. So I have to give my hat off to Victoria Randem for an absolutely gorgeous and scene-stealing portrayal of Termuthis, the high priestess. My only wish is that she should have sung Posentefta, the high priestess solo scene, with her in the flesh. That would have been great. But other than that, Victoria Randem continues to be a shining star all the way through, and I'm really happy that she's taking on a lot more challenges, especially in the lyric soprano repertoire. It should be no surprise that I continue to be conflicted with Yusuf Eyvazov's Radames. Why? Because I've always been irritated by his caprino. I've always been irritated by his voice being one size too small for all of these huge dramatic / Heldentenor roles, let alone spinto tenor roles. And it doesn't help that his emission tended to be ugly sounding to the ears and very unpleasant to listen to, and even very annoying to listen to. There were just times I just couldn't stand him and his caprino, which tended to be annoying and unpleasant and really distracting, especially considering that he is essentially a natural light lyric tenor, singing all of these big tenor roles. And if he had proper guidance in his singing as well as proper coaching, he could have ended up as a fine light lyric tenor, singing the likes of Nemorino or Don Ottavio, or even Edgardo from Lucia, or even Elvino, Milio, and all of these wonderful light lyric tenor roles. And of course, let's also not forget if he also got rid of his caprino. But because he's singing a lot of these roles like Radames, Calaf, and even Cavaradossi and Manrico, the results that he has been producing, especially to lovers of good opera singing, have been a mixed bag at best, but disappointing at worst. Hearing him as Radames, I was extremely skeptical. I was not holding my breath, especially when he was singing Celeste Aida. But the one saving grace that he had was that his pianissimo high B flat combined with Marina Rebeka's pianissimo high B flat after Opera Addio was quite lovely to listen to. Although let's face it, Placido Domingo and Montserrat Caballé in their 1974 studio recording can never ever be paralleled in terms of how Domingo and Caballé produced that absolutely gorgeous high B flat in pianissimo / morendo. Just listening to that was heaven on earth. But I also have to say that what Evazov and Rebeka did with their pianissimo high E flat after singing Opera Addio was serviceable. And Yusuf Evazov does look good on stage. He is dashing. He is handsomely built in terms of how he dresses, how he walks around the stage, and how his mannerisms are. Although there were times that his mannerisms did border on the amateurish side. There were times that he was opening his mouth when he was not singing. There were times that it felt like he wasn't sure of what he was doing in this moment. It almost felt like he was kind of confused. Vocally speaking, Yusuf Ayvazov only fulfills barely a quarter of Radames's music in terms of hitting that morendo high B flat in Opera Dio. The rest of his voice was not beefy, not powerful, and not robust enough to make Radames a striking warrior character. So what I'm left with is an annoyingly light tenor with an equally annoying caprino trying to sing all of these big dramatic roles, but doing so with a not so great technique. And I should make it clear that I love it when true Helden tenors sing Radames. Give me voices like Giovanni Martinelli, Giovanni Zenatello, Enrico Caruso, Galliano Massini, Bernd Aldenhoff, Seth Svanholm, Max Lorenz, Lauritz Melchior, Ludwig Suthaus, Ramon Vinay, Hans Beurer, Mario del Monaco, James King, and even Spas Venkov. But if we're looking for the complete package of Radames, you can't go wrong with Mario del Monaco and his overall virility and muscular virility at that. Just give me any true Helden tenor with a bicep flexing, masculine, manly, virile, warlike quality that makes me want to swoon for him and that makes both Amneris and Aida just fall for him. Don't give me someone who is essentially a light tenor trying to sing a huge role like Radames, like Yusuf Ayvazov, please. But even with all the gripes I had with Yusuf Ayvazov, yes, he's still easy on the eyes, and his pianissimo high B flat was solidly sung, although the rest of his voice was not anything to write home about. He was still serviceable in terms of his stage presence, being all gallant and all that, but the rest of the role that he managed to accomplish was not really to my liking. At least Gonzalo Quinchaoal was a dashing and vocally superb messenger. He had a fine lyric tenor voice that has the potential to keep on growing and keep on glowing. And he's got a great future ahead of him. I argue that the messenger could use a lot more steel, metal, and incisiveness in the voice. And voices that come into my mind and ears are the following tenors: Nicola Martinucci, Hermano Mauro, and even Robert Nagy. Those spinto tenors had way more secure techniques and were absolutely peerless in this thankless role. With Gonzalo Quinchawal, he was still a fine tenor as the messenger, and I salute all of his efforts for making this thankless tenor part come to life. René Pape used his nobility and overall strong stage presence to make Ramfis come to life. This is a role that he's been singing for nearly 20 to 30 years, and he still continues to have that fine basso cantante voice of his intact, and his voice did grow in roundness and richness, given the many years that he has been singing on stage. I do argue that I would have loved for a darker, more cavernous voice for Ramfis, and voices that come into my mind are Ezio Pinza, Alexander Kipnis, Tancredi Passero, Gottlob Frick, Kurt Böhme, Giulio Neri, Jerome Hines, Cesare Siepi, Nikolai Gyorov, and my personal all-time favorite, Bonaldo Giotti. Those were superb Ramfises, complete with cavernous tones, and dark tones at that. And if you want somebody who could master the art of cavernous basso profondo singing, look no further than Giulio Neri. He was a Ramfis par excellence. With René Pape, he was still good as Ramfis, but not really as cavernous as the bassi profondi of the past. At least he was still in good vocal shape, and he still had the strong stage presence to boot. Grigori Shkarupa was a solid king of Egypt. Yes, he did have that fine, dark basso cantante tone, but there were occasions where he sounded quite throaty and not dark enough. If I want true, naturally dark sounding kings of Egypt, I dare not look further than Italo Taio, Plinio Clavassi, Franco Calabrese, Luis Garro, Norman Scott, Norman Corden, Fernando Corena, Hans Zotin, and even my personal favorite, Luigi Roni. Those were fine basses with naturally round and rich tones, who managed to make the king of Egypt imposing and strong. With Grigori Shkarupa, I could forgive him of his throatiness because he still had that dark tone that made his king of Egypt strong enough. But it wasn't really strong enough to stand up to those really real bassos of the past. But he was still a dedicated singing actor, and I have to give him a lot of props for making the best out of this character part. Gabriele Viviani was a strong Amonasro, and he was absolutely solid in that particular role. He sang the role with abandon. He gave it his all. However, I felt like he had to force his voice to sing big and strong all over the orchestra, and there were times that he was just pushing it just to sound big. But he is still a decent singer with no wobbles in his voice, although his voice could sound beefier, it could sound darker, it could sound richer, and it could sound a lot more exciting. We had genuine baritones of the past singing a storm of Amonasro, such as Giuseppe Taddei and my personal favorite, Gian-Giacomo Guelfi, unless I forget about Cornell McNeil. If we're talking bass baritones, or even high basses, you can't go wrong with Georg Hahn, and another favorite Amonasro of mine, Simon Estes. Now, Simon Estes is my personal favorite because he managed to combine that dark, round, and rich tone and some cavernous low notes at that with some exciting singing and great technique to boot. With Gabriele Viviani, yes, he could use a lot more beefiness. Yes, he could use a lot more darkness and chestiness as a real baritone, but he was still serviceable all throughout in terms of giving Amo Nasro his warlike determination and warlike fierceness. So overall, the singing did vary in quality. I have to give it to Marina Rebeka for carrying the evening with everything she's got. It certainly was not an easy job for her to take on Aida with everything that she's got, but she did so in a laudable fashion. And even though I still fear for her taking on this role much further, I still kind of encourage her, especially when she uses those top notes to her advantage, especially her high E flat if she were to sing it in the triumphal scene, which would have been very exciting, but I digress. Marina Rebeka was a totally committed stage actress and fine singer all the way through. And even though her voice could actually benefit from a lot more clarity on her chest tones, she was still a great singer all the way through, using her musicianship and her technical prowess to make the role of Aida her own. While I did have my misgivings with Elina Garancia and Yusuf Ayvazov as Amneris and Radames respectively, they were still able to be committed performers, even though their voices were extremely flawed. The voices of the lower voiced men, such as René Pape, Grigore Scarupa, and Gabriele Viviani, were solid all the way through, and there was some excellent singing to be accomplished by Gonzalo Quinchaval and Victoria Random as the messenger and the priestess respectively. The conducting done by Nicola Luisotti was on the fast side. There were times that the big parts didn't sound too big enough, and there were times that the lush parts didn't sound as lush as they should have, but he was still able to keep everybody going, and there were times that some parts did seem a little bit rushed, but there were also moments where the quiet parts were quite nice to listen to, and he was still able to do a fine job with keeping everybody together, and the chorus, the orchestra, and the extras of the Staatsoper Unter den Linden were reliable as always. So with Calixto Bieito's production of Aida being extremely polarizing and just not that nice to watch, let alone view, I could still say that you might as well just go into this production only for the singers. At least Marina Rebeka sang up a storm. At least Elina Garancia managed to use glamour to her advantage. At least Yusuf Ayvazov managed to use his own dapper handsomeness to make the role of Radames sufficiently charismatic. And at least there was some fine singing to be accomplished by René Pape, Grigore Scarupa, and Gabriele Viviani, and the great, excellent singing to be accomplished by Gonzalo Quinchaval and Victoria Random as a beautifully sung messenger in Quinchaval's side, and an equally beautifully sung priestess in Random's side. Please don't go for the production, just go for the singers. You probably might not be disappointed at all, especially when you hear Marina Rebeka as Aida. And for those of you who caught this production of Aida at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden, what'd you think of it? Did you feel that Marina Rebeka stole the show as Aida? Did you feel that Elina Garancia kind of lacked the additional vocal resources to make Amneris a complete character? Did you feel that Yusuf Ayvazov wasn't really that good as Radames? Did you feel that the low voice singers of René Pape, Grigore Scarupa, and Gabriele Viviani sang better than everybody else? Did you also feel that Gonzalo Quinchaval and Victoria Random sang superbly as the messenger and the priestess respectively? Or did you feel that the singing was not to your liking, even to the point where you just want to completely abandon this production altogether? Please let me know in the comments below. Well, that's it for my review of Verdi's Aida at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden. Tune in tomorrow for my review of Bizet's Carmen at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, starring Aigul Akmeshtina as Carmen. So until then, good night, everybody.